Welcome back to Following Node on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 137, and we are covering chapters 7, 8, and 9 of The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. Paul, how are you?
Oh, so good. Excited to get further in. I think we're wrapping up part one, and that's always exciting.
Eliot?
I'm doing great. I feel like we are blazing through this book. Like we're reading a little bit faster pace, I think, than we've done some previous books, but just kind of looking at the page count we've already covered, we're moving for podcast pace, I suppose.
I do want to talk about that a little bit. It's kind of interesting that word count, we are a little bit higher than average than a Stormlight book per episode, but the chapters in Mistborn are longer than the chapters in Stormlight. We're only covering 3 chapters every episode, but our word count is higher than 4 chapters of a Stormlight episode. So,
Yeah. And portion of the book, like instead of 120 chapters or whatever, we have like, I don't know. How many are in this book? Like 50?
I don't even think it's that many. I think it's like 45, maybe.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it's way less. It's more of a linear progression straight through the book and stuff. So it just feels like we're flying, which is honestly kind of fun because Stormlight was incredibly fun, but also sometimes it was like, wait, that was all I get?
Yeah.
You know? And this time I'm like, all right, I got to keep up. So it's nice to have that kind of change of pace.
I agree. And it's 38 chapters.
Whoa.
I was going to say 38, but I said 45 to have it.
Kidding me?
I was actually going to say 38.
I guess I read Hero of
And an
Ages
epilogue.
last. And so I think that one's closer to like 50 or something. Who knows?
Do you guys have 2 words to summarize this episode? Eliot?
Of course. Those are not my 2 words. The 2 words are monsters and metals.
Okay. Paul?
Ooh. My 2 words are practice and adage.
Okay.
Like an adage, like a saying. So it took me forever to remember what that word was. So that's all. I'm also gonna say. I'm sorry. I'm gonna hijack you for a second, Trevor.
The intro has to go.
Oh wait.
Let's use these 4 words and talk about Mistborn.
Okay, now that that's done.
There you go.
Okay, now that that's done. And this is not important at all. So I'm really, really sorry for hijacking, but I'll apologize later. This is the just random cup I found in my cabinet. I just wanted to I don't know. I feel like people don't appreciate it enough. This is America's Railroad, Durango and Silverton, some kind of railroad museum. It's just a random cup. I have no idea about this railroad or anything.
I
just
do.
want y'all to know that
I know all about Durango and Silverton. It's in Colorado.
Yes, it is. That's really cool. However, however, I just want y'all to know that for I don't know the last 2 years, I think just about 2 years, every time I go get a different cup for every episode, almost every single time, I've walked into my kitchen and opened up the cabinet, and there's a different cup. Like there's some just random other cup. It's just like it's magically producing. I have 3 other guy roommates currently, and it's just always something. I don't know. They just appear, and I just wanted to appreciate the fact that I've gone like 2 years just with cups producing out of my kitchen. Anyways, that's really dumb, and we can continue to our content. I just think that's really crazy because I didn't think I would find a new one today. I thought I was gonna give up on that for Mistborn of like, okay, I'm gonna have to start repeating cups, but I'm gonna go as long as I can. So.
I guess your roommates are kind of sitting in their rooms going, where do all my cups keep disappearing to? I keep putting them in the cupboard and then they just disappear and they're gone. What is up with this house?
That's true. So it's gonna be like, I got that at the Railroad Museum for Durango and Silverton, and it's not gonna be there, and they're gonna be really upset about that. But I'll deal with the consequences. So it's just the small price that I put up with, for the channel here. So without further ado, I'm I'm happy to hop in however you see best fit, Trevor.
So I was going to introduce a new segment on this podcast, but you already have with the escapades of finding a new cup. So the second new segment on the podcast, we're going to turn it over to Eliot. For those of you who have read Mistborn and are not necessarily like doing a reread with us, we're going to start summarizing our chapters in the episode at the beginning so you guys can get a ballpark of where we're at in the book so that you can be a little bit more educated and refresh your brain as we talk about it and get a little bit more out of the discussion. So, Eliot, do you want to go ahead and summarize 7 through 9?
I certainly can. And yes, shout out to our Discord channel as well. A couple different people in there, I think, requested this as a segment. It was an excellent idea. So we will do this henceforth. All right. So we for episode 137 here, we did chapters 7 through 9, which wrapped up the end of part 1 and then went one chapter into part 2. At the first part of this segment, we met Marsh. Kelsier's brother Marsh shows up to at the very end of the meeting that they're having with the crew. Marsh is rather grumpy, I guess. Not super happy about what's going on, not super thrilled with Kelsier. He kind of sort of mostly agrees to help out the crew by the end of it, so I think Marsh is on the crew at this point. We transition from that into Kelsier gives Vin her her Mistborn cloak, which I thought was a cool moment. And they officially start their training. He teaches her about a variety of different metals. We get to learn a lot about them. He explains just about all 8 of the basic metals. Maybe not quite all of them, but you can kind of fill in some of the pieces on the rest of them. Kelsier and Vin, they head outside the city, so they climb over the wall and they head out into the night, and they see a mist wraith in the middle of the land as they're going. Kind of crazy moment there. They meet up with a new character. Help me with the name, guys. Sazed?
Okay,
Really close, yeah.
so we haven't been doing spell checks, but maybe I need to address this up front. Not to completely derail your segment here, Eliot, but Mistborn, the names and the locations are modeled after France and like the French countryside, Paris, like in Renaissance Paris ish. And
Okay.
so Kelsier as a name is more like Kelsier of
Ah,
like a French like add the French ending to it. I'm probably butchering that, but um the way the audiobook says Sazed is Sazed, as if he is British and he's telling you to say Z instead of Z. It is Sazed. But Brandon Sanderson also acknowledges that that is actually the incorrect way to say it if you're trying to have a French pronunciation, French accent on it. But he says, I don't care really how you say it. I'm going to say Sazed. I'm going to say Vivina is how he says Vivenna in Warbreaker. I don't care if you say Shalin. I don't care if you say Shalon. Like he's very open to not correcting people. So the audiobook says Kelsier and Sazed for our 2 characters in this scene here. So proceed.
interesting. Interesting. Okay.
I won't lie,
So
Vivina kind of hurts my
It
feelings.
hurts my feelings a little bit too. Vivenna is clearly the
Vivina
correct way to say that name, and it's a good name.
reminds me too much of like Vienna sausages, you know? But anyways.
anyway, back to our adventure. They meet up with a new character, Sazed or Saze, or I'll leave it. We'll go with Sazed. Sazed?
Yeah, Sazed
Uh,
is
he seems like a cool dude. I'm excited to talk about him a little bit. There's a moment where Kelsier gives Vin a bag of money from the previous job that she'd worked on, and there's an important moment where she decides he kind of gives her the option, "Hey, would you like to leave?" And Vin, holding all this money, way more than she's ever seen before, decides not to leave. She decides to stay. They travel on to the city of more names. Felice.
Elise, yep.
Okay, Felice, which is where our Lord Renault is. this is the imposter guy that Kelsier has stood up in place of the nobleman they're going to need. And then let's see, they make plans for Sazed to train Vin to be a young lady, a noblewoman. And that's the end of part 1. We pick up part 2 with Vin and Kelsier doing more training. Vin gets a haircut, which is a big deal for her. Sazed keeps trying to convert Vin to various different religions. Apparently, that's a hobby of his. And they establish an alias for Vin as Valette Renault, with kind of a bit of a backstory there, getting ready for her to infiltrate the noble scene. And then it kind of ends with Kelsier musing about the fact that Vin seems especially gifted at allomancy.
Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah,
Paul,
that was a.
do you want to correct him on that name, or should we let it slide?
I was about to say. Okay, so Brandon Sanderson does such a kind job of not correcting people, but oh my gosh, it hurts me a little bit. I can't lie. I was chuckling. It's you did such a great job with all the names. And honestly, I was thinking about it, and I think how you say it is probably like more correct, I guess, but that's just not how it's like heard. They talk about Lord Renew and Lady
Okay.
Velet's Renew.
Yeah.
Renew.
Instead
Okay.
of Renault, which I was thinking of like the GAUX or whatever, which I think originates from like French or things like that.
Yeah.
So I was like, you would say, oh, like Renault, not like ooh. But anyways, they say Renew, and I'm
I can buy
actually
that.
kind of criminal about correcting that in real life.
I
I have
was
several friends reading, and they're like, "Oh, Adeline," or like another name from another book, and I'm like, "You mean Adeline?" And I've kind of gotten myself in trouble for that.
I was gonna throw a fit if you were about to tell me it was pronounced Renaux.
Or
That I was gonna have a problem with, but
Yeah,
Noix.
Renew, I can do that. I can do that.
yeah, fair, fair.
They do say Lady Valette Renew is who Vin is taking the persona of Lord Renew, who we meet in chapter 8, who's an imposter. We'll get there. Um Getting into chapter 7. Marsh, leaving off from last week, chapter 6 ends with Marsh like storming through the door and demanding Kelsier, like, we're gonna have a meeting right now. You guys, like, get over here. Marsh and Kelsier have this conversation, and I'd like to hear you guys' feedback on these two characters, because Marsh seems to be the higher moral character between Kelsier and Marsh, kind of. And he comes in here and says, how dare you have this whole plan? I've been working for this rebellion since I was like, 4, and you've been off goofing off with your friends. You come in here, take this whole thing, and now, like, I've done so much work and you're taking all the glory, basically. And he gets really mad at him. What do you guys think of this conversation?
I Your comment there is interesting, and I was thinking about it. The is Marsh supposed to be the kind of righteous and straight path version of Kelsier? Couldn't quite tell. Like
Yeah.
maybe. He also kind of comes off as rather like jaded and scarred in a way, which is kind of Kelsier's thing, right? But it seems like maybe Marsh set off with maybe back in the day, Marsh had all the good motives and Kelsier did not. But now here we are in today where Kelsier's had a bit of a change of heart. Marsh maybe hasn't had a change of heart, but he's now just kind of beaten down by the fact that he's been trying to lead a rebellion for so long and it just isn't working and he's just very grumpy about it.
Yeah. This whole, like, older brother, younger brother disagreement thing is a very well traveled trope, and I don't think Brandon Sanderson is covering any new ground with these two characters, like, as far as their intro, at least.
Does that mean I'm the old grumpy one and you're the new passionate
I
on a mission one?
I didn't think I had to spell that out. That was pretty obviously yes, but if you want to highlight it, then sure.
I have to say, like, one comment on that, which honestly it's changed a little bit of how I've been reading this. Elliot, I think you made a comment in our previous episode about how in the time of Brandon Sanderson writing this book, he was more so like there was more of a trying to develop himself as an author and make a name for himself, and almost following more of a traditional pattern, I guess, than we probably see in in his other writings that we've read. And I think that's uh like a neat thing to point out with this. And like Trevor said, that's kind of a common-ish trope. Like it's not super uncommon to see like brothers or some form of kinship with like a dichotomy of personalities. Um, I have to say, I think that's one that I'm a personal, like, huge fan of. I think it's really, really cool to kind of see that style. But just something that I've been thinking about while I've been reading is kind of more of those, I guess, common tropes that you might see in other fantasy novels.
A lot of good conflict you get between two characters is when characters line up like, 94%, right? And then they kind of disagree right when you get to the finish line there, and then that's when you have conflict there. So that's pretty much exactly where Marsh and Kelsey are set up, at least to start. Marsh is a seeker, and we get a couple mentions of seekers, just kind of one-liners. We Seekers are not part of the. Are they, or are they? Are seekers part of the whole training session? Do we get a comment on that?
So so Kelsier doesn't like get into so much two of the metals, which I believe one of them is the Seeker metal. He doesn't really get into the well,
He talks
no,
about
he
it
does
from the
get into that one.
perspective of copper. So
Yeah,
he's explaining copper, and he says you burn this so that a seeker can't find you, but he also doesn't
right.
really highlight the importance or the um, consequences of a seeker and what they can do. Um,
He
so
he hints at it. I think he has Vin try bronze
mhm.
at that moment and is like, "Hey, can you feel anything?" And she's like, "Yeah, I feel like a pulsing or something coming from you because you're doing allomancy." It's the emotional ones that they don't really do any training on in
Okay.
this chapter.
So what did you guys think of seekers and all inquisitors are seekers?
I was intrigued by the question that it seems like Kelsier himself might be asking, which is it a requirement to be a seeker to become an inquisitor, or does becoming an inquisitor somehow make you a seeker?
Yeah.
Intriguing question.
I think a good
Based on what we
question.
know, I would assume it's the first one that they just find mistings who are seekers and induct them into inquisitor school.
Any input there, Paul?
I'm Yeah, no, I'm thinking about this. I never, honestly, I never realized that Inquisitors were seekers. I guess, like that specifically. Like I knew that they could, um, I knew that they could detect Allomancers, and kind of their whole thing was like hunting Allomancers, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess I just never made that distinction of them just being seekers, and so yeah, I'm not sure. In my head, I'm just thinking that's like kind of just a choice. Just like they're seekers. Cool. Like that's kind of their purpose, is seeking out and finding Allomancers on behalf of the whoever they work for. I forgot the name. Is it like the Ministry or something like that that they're called? I feel like the uneducated one here, even though I've read this series. But there's a lot of little details which I'm excited to actually learn more about this go through. So,
The Steel Ministry, I think is what it's called.
yeah.
Um, what's up with ATM? Elliot, give me a prediction on ATM. Marsh is all about. He's pointing at ATM on the board and saying, "If you're really after the Lord Ruler, this should not be up here." And you are telling your crew, "We're going after ATM because it'll help us." You're going out. He's accusing Kelsey of saying, "You're going after ATM because it's worth a lot of money." So, what is your prediction with ATM? What does it do? Why does Kelsey want it?
Yeah. So we had a comment before in one of the previous chapters. It was very cryptic, but it basically hinted that Kelsier used ATM, like he burned it, when he destroyed Lord Tresting's manor all the way back in the prologue. There was a vague reference to that. So going purely off of that, we know it's one of the allomantic metals. It's not one of the normal eight, so it's a special one. It somehow gives you some kind of destructive ability, I don't know what exactly. We know that Lord Tresting's manor basically burned to the ground. So I'm guessing there's some sort of incendiary element to it. There's fire involved somehow. It's my only guess.
And
Powerful.
just to clarify, and I know my periodic table of the elements, right? The other 8 that we're talking about are all like earth, real earth metals. This is something made up, correct?
I believe so. I do not believe atium is on the periodic table of elements.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. We had the whole conversation about like base elements and like alloys, but yeah, the others are like we have them here on planet Earth, not just in Scadrial.
Right. There's a quick comment in Vin's inner dialogue before they go out to do training, and I left my book downstairs so I can't read the quote, but it says something to the effect of there was genuine laughter and mirth coming from the thank you. It's just do you know the quote I'm talking about?
No,
um
I don't. I was just holding up the book so you could read it.
Thank you. That there was genuine mirth and laughter coming from like the either the kitchen or the crew room where Breeze and Ham and everybody were. They were just enjoying a drink together, and Vin feels not excluded, but that she's excluding herself purposely. That she's not allowed to go enjoy that with the crew, and I just wanted to highlight that as we don't get too much inner struggle compared to Stormlight, I think, in these early chapters, where that's a lot of early Stormlight is inner dialogue. That is just a quick highlight of where Vin's mental state is of I'm not allowed to enjoy my time ever. I'm that is not who I am. That is not my life. So I'm glad they're enjoying their time. I'm never joining that. I'm not allowed to.
I'm definitely getting hints of some of the mental health type stuff coming out. And it's very, Vin's struggles are very different than, well, maybe not very different. Vin's struggles are different than some of the struggles we've been through with some of the Stormlight characters. But I'm starting to already draw some parallels and maybe see where this might be going as far as the what is Vin's inner struggle? What's her mental battle?
Yeah. All right, Elliot, do you want to run us through your spreadsheet? Did you get to fill out your spreadsheet this episode or this chapter?
I have made many updates to the spreadsheet, and in fact, it's beginning to become a bit like a puzzle. Even though we haven't gotten every single thing spelled out for us, I can start to fill in the gaps with a few logical assumptions. It's the system is spelled out incredibly systematically, which I love. The the spreadsheet guru in me is like, yes, my spreadsheet is starting to look awesome. Kelsier goes through the different metals, which we already kind of knew what they were, but he walks through them all and gives us some different aspects of them or descriptions or elements of the different magic that those metals can do. So I started categorizing them because I realized you can take your 8 metals and they all fall into one of 2 options in 3 different categories. So you have internal and external allomantic powers. You have mental and you have physical allomantic powers. And then you have pushing and you have pulling allomantic powers. And so every single one of these powers and the associated metal fills out one of those options. So, like, as an example, tin is the internal physical polar, which is, if you think about it, kind of appropriate for what it does. Tin enhances your senses. It's internal to you. You're not impacting things outside of you. You're doing something within your own body. It's mental. You're not affecting the physical world. It's the senses that you're receiving into your brain, and it's the polar. You're pulling that information into your body better or faster or more than you could without it. So tin eyes have that super sensibility. It's the internal mental polar. Whereas like pewter for example, is the internal physical pusher. It's the pairing of tin, which makes sense because pewter is the alloy of tin. Pewter is mainly tin with some extra metal into it. So it's sort of it pairs with tin. It's very similar to tin in that it's internal and physical, but now pewter, saying the wrong things, aren't I? Pewter is internal, physical, but it's the pushing side of things. So you're pushing your body to achieve more with the increasing of your physical abilities. So you can really break it down into categories and you can align different things. I can imagine a bunch of different, I'm sure this already exists, like diagrams you can draw up that you can, draw lines and linkages between the two of them or like color code things. I guarantee you people have done that before. Maybe even Brandon has an official version of that. It's coming together pretty cool.
I think he does have an official like poster on his website of how it all works.
I believe
That
it.
is really cool, by the way. Elliot, I never made the connections about like I knew there was a like an opposite, a push and a pull, but I never thought about the like internal, external, like
hmm
all the stuff like that. And that's a really, really cool distinction.
And I wouldn't have thought about it too much either if I hadn't taken the time to sit down and write it all out. They kind of drop lines about it here and there, where Kelsey will say things like, "Oh, steel, the external physical power," and then he goes on and on and on. Like if you don't take a pause to go write that down and then start to like organize the sticky notes on the board, like it takes a little bit of kind of engineering to piece it all together, but once you do, it makes a lot of sense.
So what are you missing?
Well, so I can pretty much fill in all the gaps. He doesn't talk about everything, but as soon as I realized the pattern, I could basically just continue the pattern. So I have now in my spreadsheet all the 8 metals and whether they're internal, external, mental, physical, pushing, or pulling. And then of course whether they're an element or whether they are an alloy and which element they pair with as the alloy of that element. So I have them all, at least the first 8.
Anything else from chapter 7?
I guess I got very excited that Kelsier directly answered one of the questions that I asked probably last episode, which was we get talking about all this alloys side of things. My immediate question was like, well, hang on a second. There's a lot of different alloys that you can make. And if you're going to make an alloy, the percentages of the metals that you use to make it are very important. And so my question was like, do you have to have exactly the right percentage makeup of an alloy for it to work? And Kelsier answered that question very directly. Yes. Apparently, the answer is yes. It does matter. You have to have exact, carefully measured alloys of these metals in order to use them for allomantic purposes. And he even mentioned like if you're off a little bit, it might still work, but maybe like not as effective. But if you go too far where it's not close enough, now you're going to start doing damage to yourself if you try and burn it as an allomantic metal, which I thought was very interesting and very cool. And then my last thing was one of the other things that Kelsier says in this chapter I thought was awesome. I'm starting to kind of piece together the magic system at least a little bit, which I'm really excited about because it was the one thing I was looking forward to the most. And Vin starts to kind of catch on and she's like, man, there's a lot going on here. And Kelsier's response was, yep, that's the great art of allomancy, which is the knowing what to use when, which as a misting is pretty straightforward. You only have one power. But
Right.
as a mistborn, things get really complicated really fast. Like when an enemy jumps out at you from a dark alley, you got a lot of options of different magics you can pull and things you can do. Like that takes some skill to know like how to react and what to do. It makes me think of like a video game that has way too many skills or like things in it, and how like I know exactly what I want to do, but then in the moment when I get rushed, I'm just start spamming buttons and it doesn't go very well. Like you can't do that as an allomancer. You got to know what you're doing.
Or even worse, the video game that gives you all these options, but one is clearly better than the rest of them, so you just keep using that specific one and ignore the rest of them. That's even worse.
Anyway, that was all my breakdown on our allomancy lesson.
All right, going into chapter 8, where they jump out of the city and start walking around. Eliot, you had in your Discord reaction comment that it is not possible for allomancers to affect metal that is inside a body. So once you swallow your metals, you're safe. don't worry about someone ripping your steel out of your stomach, that, like that type of thing. And you said, I hope Brandon has a good explanation for this. Well, I'll let you talk for a little bit, but then I have a question for you.
This one caught my eye immediately because we've just been given this huge lesson on all the rules of allomancy, which is awesome. I love this kind of stuff. World building, science behind the magic. Yeah, give it to me all day. But then there's this little bit kind of snuck in there right at the end. Vin is actually worried about her earring that she's wearing. She's like, "Oh, do I need to not wear this earring?" And Kelsey was like, "No, that actually pierces your body, so you're fine. And therefore, having metals in your stomach is also fine. Another allomancer can't just rip those out." And I kind of paused there and I was like, "That's awfully convenient, Brandon. That that I I feel like there's got to be a reason for that, and not just the whole, oh, wait a second, my whole magic system breaks if people can just rip the metals out of each other's stomachs." And I'll say, I have full faith that there is a reason for this. Brandon thinks of everything. Everything that I've thought of, questions that I've had, questions that I've waited multiple books to get answered, thinking, oh my gosh, there's no way this is ever going to get answered. There's answers. Brandon thinks of it well. He is a master of world building. I guarantee you he's at least thought of why that's the case. But the way it's kind of presented felt a little like, uh-huh, okay, got it.
My question for you then is, does he really need an answer for everything, or can you not just accept there's this lynch pin, safety pin rule that holds it all together, and it's just magic, and you're gonna have to deal with it? Is that not okay sometimes?
It's the classic suspension of disbelief in fantasy works.
This this is a big question that goes well beyond Brandon. This is a question that touches on, fantasy as a whole. And to address that kind of side of it, I don't think every little thing has to have an answer or I'm out sort of thing. I I am okay with a little bit of that suspension of disbelief, a little bit of that. I'm going to buy into this world and believe that this is a um, functioning place where things make sense, and I don't need to understand everything. I don't understand everything about this world that I live in. There's just things that happen, and I'm like, oh, okay, sure, I believe it because I saw it. I can do that a bit when I'm reading. I believe it because, well, it says it right there on the page. That said, the way Brandon, and this is I'm ruined because we started with Stormlight, I guess. The way Brandon builds his worlds with the amount of detail in the world building, that puts me in a mindset that expects everything to have a reason. Because so much of it does, and because so much of it is so masterfully crafted with all these intricacies and different magic systems that kind of play into each other, but then are also their own thing, but that makes sense and there's reasons for it all. If this became something that never gets explained in any of the books, on one hand, I'm going to buy into it and say, yep, I believe it's fine. On the other hand, I'm going to always wonder. I'm always going to be stuck on this, like, hang on a second. Everything else has a reason. Why does this one thing not? So it will bother me if this does not get explained ever. Can I still be okay with it? Probably.
What about for you, Paul? Do you have to have everything explained to you?
I definitely don't. Um, typically, and especially this is something I was going to bring up of just like the pacing of this book. A lot of Brandon Sanderson's works, you're jumping between perspectives, you're doing all this stuff. This is more of a straight shot through, and to the point where sometimes things like concepts, lessons, chapter distinctions. Later on, it gets. I mean, like where we are, it's getting to be more distinct. Probably because I know the characters more, right? But um, sometimes chapters kind of like blend together more so than other books, And so for that sake, it honestly helps me a lot with like not wondering too much about questions. I didn't ask too much. Like there are obviously the questions I don't know, like what are these other metals? What are they gonna do? What is ATM gonna do? What is like the actual significance? Is Kelsier gonna turn out to like do great things? Is this going to be a flop? Like, there's a ton of questions and a ton of stuff I have to, wonder about. But know that I don't. It's ultimately not that important to me. If stuff starts to contradict, that's usually where I draw the line of if it's like, oh, this does this or this does that or this is the limits of this, but then you see it completely like blown out of the water in like an actual like fight scene or something like that, then that's when it gets harder for me. That's especially true for like movies and shows. That's whenever stuff starts to just feel fake, unrealistic, or things like that. That's a lot harder. As far as like not understanding this, um, I just already know if he didn't put that sentence in there, then everyone would be like, why don't the Elementers just like target the opponent's metal? Like, and then like everyone would pull that. It's there's reasons for it, but Lord of the Rings people are like, why did they fly on the eagles to Mordor? Like it wasn't specifically addressed in the book, and so people are gonna ask it, and so I appreciate Brandon like addressing it, whether or not there's like a reason for it. It just a little one sentence of the thousands that are in the book, to be like, you can't do that. It is. I didn't think about it too much.
Okay. For me, just real quick, I'm usually of the idea that you can do whatever you want with your magic system. If you are talking about magic, you can pretty much do whatever you want, and I'm gonna be fine with it. Um, what where I do draw the line though is when characters start doing things that I don't think that character would do. If there's a character that has a reaction to something that either have to do with the magic or not, and then reacts in a way that I'm like, wait, I thought I knew this character, and now does something that I don't think that character would do, that's where I get caught up in everything. Um, I was going somewhere else with that, but I don't remember where. But we can move on. Elliot, how do you spell terraceman? I don't have my book on me.
You hit it right in the notes. Terrisman.
Hmm. See, this got me. We didn't do a spell check on this or anything, but I opened our notes and saw that, and I was kind of baffled because I've heard terraceman so many times now. But I assumed it was like a terrace, like what is it, TERACE, like a terrace. It's like a
Uh-huh.
structure. Don't know the actual definition, but it's some form of structure, like a terraceman.
Is a
You
terrace a
know,
balcony? That's what I have it defined in my head as.
I thought of it. You might be right. I'm actually curious though.
But regardless, terrace, Terris, is like a nation, like a people group.
Oh,
So terraceman is
a
why he's
man of the people groups,
yes.
which makes a lot of sense. An actual terrace is a level paved area or platform next to a building, a patio or veranda. So like it's like a patio. It's like a concrete patio.
I was almost right.
Yeah. You were that just like a story
Yeah,
higher
just
or
a
a story or more higher. Like a balcony, a
down
patio,
in the
same thing.
garden below.
Yes. The balcony would look over the terrace. Anyways, um, so Sazed is a man of the people groups, not of the patio furniture and patio landscaping. So it's an important distinction to make as you are, if you are reading for the first time or if you're a long time reader.
Elliot, what did you think of Sazed?
I We haven't seen too much of him, but I like what we've had so far. He strikes me as someone who's gonna be very quotable. He seems like he always has that little thing, the right thing to say in the right moment. He's that one you can kind of turn to and be like, "All right, words of wisdom, say Zed, what you got?" And he can, drop you a little nugget of something good.
Even to the point of maybe being annoying, right? He's
Yeah.
always got something to say. Just
Yep.
let me grieve, let me be happy. No, you've always got a quip for everything.
I was gonna say I feel like I take Sazed in a very good way of like he just like literally it's like his his life's dedication to like know about all these like people groups, all these like religions, all the things, anything. What's the term for it? Anthropology, like on Earth, like that geography, all the stuff, And he's so wise, like so he seems like he knows all this stuff. But I think he would be a horrible person to vent to because he would provide you answers.
Solve all your problems.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And then what about Lord Renu? What do we think of Lord Renu and why we can't have an Inquisitor near him?
Important on this one. It was mentioned earlier. Kelsier said something like, "I've got this imposter. He's perfect. No one can tell that it's not him." And somebody else in the crew turns to him. Maybe it's like it's the guy that doesn't have any powers. Can't remember his name
Dachshund.
now. It's either that guy or the ska rebellion leader guy. Turns to Kelsier
Eden or
and
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, there you go, Eden. Turns to Kelsier and says, "Well, how? How do you have that?" And Kelsier's answer to that was, "You don't want to know," basically. And so that has me intrigued. And here we are. We see the guy. He doesn't seem outwardly off. Vin doesn't seem put off by him or creeped out or anything like that. But I'm still very curious and suspicious that there's magic at play here somehow. That this is somehow a magical insert Stormlight spoiler here type thing going on.
I know the answer to this one, so I can't really chime in. But yes, what is happening? Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to the end of part 1. 8 chapters in, we're at the end of part 1. There's a 2-month time skip, and then we get dropped right into this action sequence. And Vin is fighting with another Mistborn. And then we get through this whole fight sequence. She throws a bag into the air to like fake out the other Mistborn that she's jumping at him, but it's actually just the bag of coins. Anyway, it's just Kelsier. Like they're just sparring. I feel like they could have opened with that, so it's not like because I got halfway through this. I got halfway through this scene, and I'm like, "What is happening? Where am I in the book?" Like, I didn't think we were fighting other Mistborn, and but maybe that's part of the whole thing of, oh, she's in danger. No, she's not. She's just sparring with Kelsey.
I didn't have much to take away from this scene. Vin's learning, Kelsier's teaching. She's very much the apprentice. She's very much the apprentice. He's very much the master, but it also is very much the whole like un unexpected prodigy trope
Yeah,
of here's somebody the diamond in the rough basically of wow, she's a street urchin who we've taken in, and oh my gosh, she's so powerful at this magic system. It seems like that's clearly the path we're headed on. Which I don't have a problem with. It's just very much like an established trope.
Like I mentioned before, with some of these more common tropes, I have like mixed feelings because I love like original stories, but I think Brandon does such a great job with his writing and makes it so entertaining and exciting. It's interesting because it's like we've run into this with throughout all of our episodes. There's like the really cool action sequences and stuff that are really awesome, and it's what gets me really excited and motivated to keep reading. But it's like there's not as much to say about it. It's like, wow, they sparred and it was really cool. Like go read it for yourself because it was really cool to actually read it and picture it. But there's only so much you could say about it. But I think this like kind of master apprentice relationship is also really really cool, really like satisfying. It seems to me like a story of like building trust because Vin has been this like street urchin and someone who's always on the run, can't trust anyone and stuff. What we even got a quote last time. I don't remember the quote exactly, but it's like she wanted. I don't remember the name of the guy who traveled with them, but she like wanted someone to go with her who wasn't even like a friend or anything, but just someone who wasn't necessarily mean to her. But because she wanted company, right? And
right.
it's nice to see, like, they're not extremely close or anything, but it's almost some like trusted like relationship being built between Vin and Kelsier, and even probably the whole crew with Sazed and everyone. And we can see that kind of start to build, and it's always like really encouraging to see that. And something that I'm a big fan of is kind of the formation of the group, the dynamic, the like just the relationships and bonds that will be between the characters.
The phrase that you use there, where there's not too much input, just go read it for yourself, was my kind of thought process with the metals presentation that we get in chapter 7, where Kelsier's just walking through Vin all the metals. I put it all in the outline, but I was kind of just tempted to write see book for details, because like it's all just spelled out right there, and all I'm doing is recreating what Brandon Sanderson puts in this book. We get more Sazed talking to Vin about more religions, and he admits that he knows 562 more religions than what he's talked to Vin about in the last 2 months. The one that's talked about in this chapter is called Trelligism, where they worship the god Trell. Has something to do with the stars, and the stars versus the sun, and the sun is like evil and the stars are good. Anyway, not important. Um, and Sazed drops a line and says he's a keeper. He remembers the different religions and cultures of the world. That is his job.
It's also hinted that keepers are rare and or like hunted. Like that's he's a keeper, but that's also a secret that he would be tracked down and imprisoned or worse if the Lord Ruler figured out who he was.
Yeah, a lot of suppression of other religions, and you just have to worship the Lord Ruler. Anything else before we get into a little bit of Stormlight content?
I can throw you a quick theme for part 1 if you want it.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I I actually toyed with not doing a theme for this part and maybe the rest of the book, just because like Paul, you were just talking about a minute ago, there's not quite as much to dig into in the story, at least so far, as there was in Stormlight. And maybe that's just because it's shorter, and so we had less time to, stop and talk about philosophy. We do that for multiple pages at a time in Stormlight, whereas here not so much. But I went ahead and picked a word, or actually, I'm going to cheat and do 2 words. I, I want to say the theme for part 1 is just metallurgy. I feel like I've learned about metals and alloys, and that's the biggest thing on my brain coming out of part 1. But if I had to go for more of like a okay, what's something a little more emotional or thematic? I guess the word I think I'd go for is fear. I think Vin is feeling a lot of fear. We talked about this. She's very kind of, it's like she's curled up in a ball all the time. She's just trying to fend off the world and not get hurt. And it makes me really sad for her. It just makes me, I don't know. Vin needs a hug. She needs a friend. But I think fear is more prevalent even than just Vin. Like that seems to be a major part of the culture, is just this atmosphere of fear of the inquisitors, of the system, this sort of half reverence, half terrified of the Lord Ruler. A lot of fear going around.
Thank you. All right, Stormlight spoilers. Here we go. Do you guys think you
Hmm.
can use allomancy on aluminum and silver? Specifically steel pushing and iron pulling. Steel pushing, when you use steel to push, you can push on any metal, is what it says. Not just like you're not pushing on steel, you're pushing on any metal and burning steel. Same with iron. You're iron burning and then pulling on any metal. How do you guys think aluminum and silver interacts with steel pushing and iron pulling?
So this, I think, is going to go back to the question of, is this investiture? It seems like aluminum is the anti-investiture from what we've learned about it in Stormlight. And I've already forgotten half the lessons that Navani taught me about metals and fabrils and things. But My guess would be if this is investiture powered magic, it would not work on aluminum because aluminum is the anti magic metal.
Yeah.
So silver, I have no idea. I don't remember my lessons on silver other than it keeps shades away in that creepy dark forest that I never want to go to.
Yeah.
So would it pull on silver? Sure, maybe. I don't know. I think so.
I I'm also curious because if the shades on what's it planet, I don't remember the name of it, um, are investiture fueled and silver seems to like burn
Mm,
away the investiture, that like if the investiture in that equation is the shade, then I would also say that silver is a counteraction to investiture along with
sure.
aluminum. But
Yep.
we've had both of them introduced, and both of them have specific rules. Whether they follow the same rule, I'm going to assume that silver and aluminum are like pewter and whatever the pewter pure one is.
And
Yeah, pewter and tin, where they're going to behave similarly, but then there's going to be something where there's a polar opposite. That'd be my guess. So I would assume that you can't steel push or iron pull aluminum or silver. That's my guess.
another question related to that that I'm asking that you guys probably know the answer to is can you allamance? Is that a verb? Can you allamance not on Scadrial? We've had Stormlight hints at you can't take Stormlight off of Roshar.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if I'm assuming there's some shards at play here that we've got some slivers of gods powering these magic systems. And so if you travel to Roshar and you ingest some steel, can you push metal around? My first guess is maybe not.
Right.
Maybe you need to be on Scadrial to do that. So I'm very curious about that.
I yeah, I'm not sure how. I'm thinking back to Warbreaker and Breaths.
Yeah.
Some, um, because we've seen uh Zyle, right, like use breaths on Roshar.
Right.
Oh yes.
And this is different because breaths is like there's like this
And
whole heightening
Hoid.
system. There's this whole like heightening system and like hierarchy. With this, I'm assuming there's not like any kind of like hierarchy system. Like it's obviously very different from breaths. It's you have a power, you ingest metal, you burn metal. Like it's not a you can accrue breaths and work this up or like things like that or learn commands and stuff like that. It's not a learned thing. It's like a you're like born with it. Um, and so I don't know how that works. With that assumption, then I'm assuming yes. If you are a Mistborn and you are on Roshar, then could you do that? There's like, are there many metals on Roshar? I feel like there's just less metal in general because it's like your currency is spheres.
Yeah.
Like your
I
I imagine a lot of like roads and stuff are with like stone and things like that. So it may just be harder to do because there's not much metal, but and also you'd have to worry about like having allomantic grade like alloys and metals like so you don't make yourself sick. Like it's like hypothetically, I think yes you could allomance on Roshar.
I hate that. I hate that as a verb.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I love it. I love it now because I used it. Now it's funny.
I wonder if it has to do with the state of the shard that you're pulling from. They're having a bunch of trouble surge binding off of Roshar, or at least we've been hinted at that. I wonder if that's because Honor is dead
Because honor is dead.
and can't move.
Interesting.
I wonder if you could void bind off of Roshar, assuming you brought void light with you. That type. I'm wondering if the sentience is not the right word. of the state of the shard that you're pulling from matters.
Well, they're like, isn't that Raise's whole thing is trying to get Stormlight off of Roshar? So there are people off of Roshar who I assume want that Stormlight. So isn't there a use for it out there?
Yes,
So
certainly. And
for that
going back
case,
to
I would
your
assume that you could do something with it.
yes, and I would assume that you can too. You just need to be able to successfully get it off of Roshar, and that's the problem. Going back to your breaths thing is what made me think of that, because endowment, as far as we know, we've gotten like 3 words of Brandon on endowment, and as far as we know, endowment is alive, which makes me think of that's why breaths works off of Nalthis.
I see. That could make sense.
Anyway, just a thought.
I had a random thought as we were reading through these chapters. As we finished part one of Mistborn, I've realized how strange it is that we're talking about Earth-like animals.
Yeah.
And I had this thought when we were discovering the mist wraith, which we didn't talk too much about, but the mist wraith, kind of creepy sounding. I really want to see some artwork on the mist wraith. If someone has some great mist wraith artwork, go post it in our Discord. I really want to see it. But they're describing this gelatinous ooze with lots of body parts that it's acquired from stuff it's found. But it's describing like deer's antlers and horses' heads and cow hoofs. And I'm reading the description like, wait, those are they're earth ant. Wait, oh, okay, okay. I gotta still gotta shift gears out of crab horses and crab deer and crab cows. It's all regular stuff now.
It that also made me remind or reminded me of Kelsier has this offhand comment about how all the trees should be green and the grass should be
Yeah,
green and not gray. And Vin's like, green? What are you talking
yeah.
about? But
Yeah.
yes, the from the hints that we've got, original Scadrial does seem very close to Earth. So I don't think Brandon Sanderson was shooting far from home, if you will, on designing Scadrial or original Scadrial, if you want to call it that.
That that bit with the green plants actually reminded me of Dune. There's a moment in Dune where they discover these green plants, and it's like this huge deal, like, oh, green plants. And that just made me think of it that being a foreign concept and what that tells you about like the world you're living in.
Well, just one more thing. I'm not going to make this a recurring segment, I promise. But if this were a Stormlight book, um, and I think if Brandon Sanderson was free to write this how he would want to write it, I think we would have seen more before the end of part one. The part one kind of ends with 5 or 6 different action sequences and 2 or 3 lectures on magic systems and politics and stuff like that. I think if this were a Stormlight book, if this were a more confident, more well established Brandon writing this, I think we would have had at least 2 more training sessions on Allomancy, and I think we would have had another like whole section dedicated to explaining Luthadel, because Luthadel has been talked about like vaguely, but we also don't really have a good grasp of what exactly is around Luthadel, happening in Luthadel, the politics. Like, does the Lord Ruler show up to meetings? Is he just this guy behind the curtain that never comes out? Like, is what is happening with the Lord Ruler? We also would have had also a random interlude, at least one, before on the other side of the planet, before the beginning of part two, because I feel like part one and part two it just says 2 month time skip. All right, keep going. Um, so I just wanted to kind of mention that there's some kind of meta commentary on Brandon as a writer reading this after Stormlight.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's fascinating to compare the two, actually. I wonder if we're doing him a little bit of a disservice when we say things like if he'd written it the way he wanted to. Because I keep thinking that way too, But I wonder if that's not actually the case. I wonder if this is how he always did and would have still, if he'd gone back in time to do it, have written this book. This was this was probably intentional, the way he wrote all this out. You mentioned it there for a second, Trevor. It's the either growth or like the expansion of Brandon. It's this is streamlined Brandon, and we've seen in Stormlight what he can kind of branch out into, given the canvas space to do that. So I don't want to paint Brandon into a corner and say, oh, he had to write this book this way because he didn't have the freedom to otherwise. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I am very fascinated by the evolution of the writing over the years and stories.
I think that's a really good point, Eliot. I think it's important to note how many different styles Brandon Sanderson has written over the years. Like, obviously, there's a progression over the years, but I mean, even he has a ton of short stories and like novellas, and obviously, like the higher fantasy approach of Stormlight and stuff like that. So I also don't think it's like, and I also don't think there's. I don't know for sure. You're welcome to speak to answer yourself, but I don't imagine that's fully how Trevor was meaning it, and I don't think he was like a. If Brandon got to do what he wanted to do with this project, he would have done this, because I think Brandon did. We went to his Dragonsteel convention, and that was kind of his whole thing. Was like, I'm not gonna write because I want to fit into a box of what I'm told I should be writing. I want to write what I want to write. And I think he has been true to that. And his style is just a testament of that, of how unique it is, and lots of things, and stuff. But I think that's a really good point that he does that. And this is a different style. It's more fast paced. It's easier to pick up and get excited and get invested quickly, in my opinion. Because there's all this like excitement out of the gate and like all these quick turns and turns and progression and everything, and I think that's a really cool thing.
I did mean it more of what Brandon Sanderson wished he could write as opposed to what his publisher would let him write. Because Brandon has commented on this, I have an advantage over you guys that I know several quotes from Brandon talking about, I wish I had done this with Mistborn.
Interesting. Okay.
So that there's a couple of, I wish I had stayed away from Grim Dark more than I had, or I wish that I had made some of the crew members female, or I wish that I had a little bit more time to explore X. I'm not going to get into specifics in the early books, like that type of thing. What Paul you're talking about is him with the Lost Metal. With when he's on book 7 of Mistborn, he's certainly writing what he wants to write and not caring what
His final four.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, anything else for episode 137?
Nada.
All right. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot. We will reconvene next week.
See ya.